Ryan O is going to make his debut as our moderator today for Community Conversations. We're super excited. He has with him Bob Burns, a lawyer from here in Omaha, and they are going to talk all things audio description and movies for you today. So we're going to go on over to Ryan and Bob in Studio A.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ryan O coming to you from the studios of the Radio Talking Book Network. Please do not adjust your radios. I know you're used to hearing Jay Nielsen moderate this program, but I talked her into letting me interview a very special guest today. We have in studio a gentleman who has lived in Omaha for a number of years, and I have known Bob, since at least the early 1990s. Since I moved to Lincoln and became involved in the National Federation of the Blind, and I was pleased to find out that Bob is also passionate about movies, which of course I am as well. And of course, these days when you go watch movies, it's beneficial to have audio description as a blind person, so I thought it would be neat to have Bob come in and talk a little about his role in bringing audio description to Omaha. Bob, welcome to the program.
Hi, Ryan.
And before we start talking about movies specifically, Jane always says that we're guests in our listeners' living rooms. We want them to welcome you as well. So tell us about yourself, about your background, and how you became who you are today.
Well, I grew up in Omaha. I went to Westside High School, and during high school is when I started losing my vision with a congenital retinal condition. And that process basically went about 10 years. From 15 is when it first started. I went through the visual impairment phase to about age 25 when I was totally blind at the end. And during that journey, I went through high school, undergrad in Lincoln, and law school in Lincoln. And we're talking about a time also where technology was basically consisted of a tape recorder. Well, actually, even a reel-to-reel. I had a reel-to-reel.
Oh, wow. Talk about ancient.
Tape recorder when I was in college, having books on reel-to-reel. So quite an advancement. Computers were, something from, science fiction and nothing that you could use. But then as technology has advanced, it's made my work as a lawyer much easier to do independently, and I basically have been practicing with an emphasis on elder law, estate planning, wills and setting up wills and trusts and probating estates, and now setting up guardianships and conservatorships for seniors that start going downhill, both either mentally or physically, is a prime emphasis of my business. And I've had an office for about 30 years on 113th and Q. So that's, a little background on my professional life. And I've been back in Omaha since 1984 and lived here continuously ever since.
And you have a family, right?
I have a wife and a son, so my son is now in his late 20s and lives in Seattle and doing well. And so parenting as a blind parent would be another topic of conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was trial and error, but we both made it through in one piece. So
right.
That I'm a big believer in all's well that ends well, even though there might be a lot of dips along the way. As long as you end up well, then all the other stuff is just good cocktail party banter.
So we'll let you tell us a little bit more about your practice near the end of the program. But, of course, we're here to talk about movies. And the first thing I want to point out is a lot of people still assume, even today with movies and television and visual entertainment so plugged into the culture, that blind people wouldn't have an interest in movies. So tell us, you and I both kind of belie that stereotype. Tell us how you first became interested in movies, not just as kind of a passing, it's Saturday and I'm bored, I want to go to the movies, but you're pretty passionate about it. When did that start for you?
Well, it really started when I was like a teenager. Back in the day on Channel 6, WW, they used to run a lot of the classic Westerns or war movies on, Saturday nights like at 10:30. And so I watched many of the epics, the John Wayne and the classic westerns and World War II movies that used to be on then, and developed a passion for movies, ever since I was a kid, and so that those Saturday night movies were a big way that I saw a lot of the the classic Western and war movies growing up.
So we are loaded with questions today, and here comes a tough one. I didn't want this to be a boring interview for you, Bob, so amidst the discussion of audio description in Omaha, I throw in some really tough ones. So here is one of them. What is your favorite movie overall of all time?
Well, it's funny you say that because I've thought about movies a lot, and so I actually have 5 movies that I think are if it's hard to say what's the best, but there's 5 movies. 1, Gladiator; 2, Saving Private Ryan; 3, Animal House; 4, the original Planet of the Apes; and 5, the movie Hombre with Paul Newman. So that is the definitive top 5 movies of all time.
Wow!
You can take it to the, you can write it down that you've now heard the definitive 5 best movies of all time.
That is a tough list to argue with. I have to admit, I've never even heard of Hombre until now, so that's something to add to my list. But in all my years of fandom, I have never seen Planet of the Apes. Can you believe that?
Big loss. And actually, that is a real. Both the original Planet of the Apes and Hombre are not available anywhere described, and that is a big. That's a sad.
That is a very sad
thing because I would love to have. Even though I've saw both of those movies visually many times.
Right.
I'd love to have a described version of those.
Becca, if you're taking notes, that's one to add to the list for Outlook Saturday night viewing is Planet of the Apes.
I would be there.
I would be there as well. All right, so let's talk about audio description. Give us the history as best you can before we talk about Omaha specifically. Do you know where kind of it came from or how it started in the U.S.? What's the history of audio description?
Yeah, actually, it originally started with a grant from the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, to WGBH, which is a big public television station in Boston. They got a grant to, create, description, described movies, and captioning started like in the 60s and really took off in the 70s. But this grant from the Education Department. If anybody has ever watched an old video cassette that had description in it, those were probably done by WGBH, and some of the movies on Turner Movie Classics, some of the description was done by WGBH, and it was done through this Department of Education grant,
right?
That kind of started the whole ball rolling.
I remember one of the Christmas presents I got from my parents in 1991 were 2 video cassettes with WGBH described movies, and the first movie that I ever saw described was Star Trek V, which was a very unfortunate experience. If you're a Trek fan, you'll know what I mean when I say that was not – it wasn't a good movie. The second one was Pretty Woman. And that was sure fun, especially when we get to the piano scene. That was sure enjoyable. So I remember WGBH. So where did it go from there? Because I collected those in the 90s. How did it go mainstream to the movie theaters themselves?
Well, so the original was just done on already done movies, but then WGBH started working with Hollywood, and they started creating. And I think it was Boston Light and Magic. I think that might have been the name that created the technology that could be installed in a movie theater. So the description was done by WGBH, and actually originally it was put on like some kind of disc, and they actually had to ship it manually to the theater, and then there was this player that the theater would stick this disc in, and it would sync with the movie, and you would get a headset, and inside the movie theater there was a broadcast beacon or whatever, that sent out the signal to the theater, and your headset picked it up. But it all started with the description had to be created. WGBH did the creation, put it on a disc, shipped it to the theaters that had this technology installed, and then at the theater, then they had to be able to, put it in and start it up when the movie started. And occasionally there would be snafus. Like one of the problems was that once it started, if there was a problem, they weren't able to go back and synchronize it. So if it didn't start out, and you often had no notice until the movie started if it was going to work or not. And if the movie started and the description came on, which usually happened, then great, hallelujah. But if it didn't, you pretty much were doomed, and we're going to have to go to a different showing of the movie because it could
get your money back from the apologetic manager who had no control over it, and then make plans to come to some other event if you could get back. So, and of course, you would also hope like heck that the CD wouldn't skip. I remember that happened to me once where it worked perfectly, but there was something wrong with the CD track or something, and it just went it was stuttering.
One of the first movies that's opening summer when we got it in Omaha was the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire.
Oh yeah, it's one of my faves.
And it was the second Spider-Man movie because it had
the one with Dr. Octopus. Yeah.
Because
I love the first one with Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. He was tailor-made for that part.
But this is the only time this ever happened. They somehow the disc was defective, and it had like a 20-minute sequence of the movie out of sequence.
Uh-oh.
So you're listening to the description, and all of a sudden the description didn't match what was going on at the screen at all. Mm-hmm. You're going, what the heck is going on? But kind of thinking about it, I thought, well, I wonder if they just somehow got something out of sequence. So I tried to pay attention so I wouldn't lose what was being done. So if they ever did, if whatever did happen on the screen matched the description, I would kind of be able to remember what happened. And sure enough, like 20 minutes of, so it ended up being like 40 minutes because you got 20 minutes of one sequence and then another 20 minutes of the sequence that were out of were not synchronized with the movie.
Right.
And so that was the only time that ever happened, but that was definitely an adventure in movie watching.
So you mentioned the first movie that came to Omaha was Spider-Man 2. So
the first movie that came to Omaha was actually the X-Men. There was a second. The second X-Men movie was the first described movie in the Omaha at the Oakview AMC. That was in like May of 2003.
Gotcha. So how did that process start? Were you involved with it back when it first came to Omaha?
Actually, that's an interesting story where it just shows what one person can accomplish. Back in the year 2000, I remember reading in USA Today talking about this whole idea. And it was intriguing, but okay, it was an interesting article, but it really didn't tell me, how to do much more than just know it existed someplace. I knew it didn't exist in Omaha, and so anyway, I with the internet and be able to Google things, early internet searches, found this MoPix. MoPix was this WGBH found some contact information. I contacted WGBH and got a hold of this gal named Mary Watkins.
I remember her name.
Yeah, and she was, the main WGBH person there. And so they had a newsletter, they had a website, and there was a place, the closest place at that time was a General Cinema in Illinois that had MoPix. So again, this is just me, just in my office, just kind of trial and error. And it had the contact information. So I called that General Cinema, and I remember the gal saying, "Oh, it's great. Wish there were more movies. There really aren't that many movies coming out with it." But it worked great. And so, there I was, with really no place to go. But I did sign up for the MoPix e-newsletter that came out weekly. and would read that and would be envious of the places that had a description. I remember the second Star Wars movie when it came out. I guess version 2.
I was going to say you're talking about one of those unfortunate prequels. Attack of the Clones, I think, is what it was called.
Attack of the Clones.
Right.
But anyway, I was so envious because it was described, but it wasn't described any place that that I could watch it. But anyway, one day, all of a sudden, and then in 2002, we were up in. My son was playing soccer, and we happened to notice the General Cinema Theater that had description, and saw a sign that they were purchased by AMC. So I thought, that's interesting, because about simultaneously with that information, in the MoPix newsletter, it said AMC was starting to put this description in all their new theaters, and were going to selectively put them in retrofit older theaters. So anyway, I called AMC corporate, and after 3 or 4 tries, finally got in contact with the person at AMC that was kind of oversaw this. I'll never forget his name, Phil Pennington, who, God rest his soul, he's now passed on, but he was a big player in this whole description being installed in theaters, at least at AMC, and AMC kind of led the way. But anyway, he said, well, Omaha's really wasn't on our retro fit list.
Great, thanks, guys.
And I always assumed when I kind of got into this that somehow Omaha was going to have to put up some money. If we were going to get this, I always assumed that we were going to have to put up some money. So I hit, so I was kind of prepared. So I hit him. I said, well, what if we raise some of the money here locally? And he was kind of blown away by the whole concept. The public paying money to put for theaters to do theater infrastructure. He said, he said, tell you what, put something in writing and send it, and I'll take it to the board. So I put it in writing, said, hey, what if Omaha raised some of the money? Would you be interested then in AMC retrofitting our Omaha theater? And the boards ended up saying yes, and the amount was decided was we would come up with half the money, which was $8,000. So in combination with, we'd been doing fundraising at the Omaha National Federation of the Blind chapter and had a pretty good amount of money we had raised and put aside for different things. So we, put up some of that money for, to kind of stake the project, and then, reached out to the deaf community, got a bunch of people, because part of this MoPix is there's also an aspect for the deaf. It's called a rear view mirror.
Right. This isn't just for audio description. The captioning, the closed captioning actually comes as a package, right?
Yeah, and so the rear view mirror, and they can actually be done separately, but and actually the captioning part is more expensive. But I thought, if Omaha, well, let's do it right. Let's do it for the blind and deaf, and then by getting the deaf community involved, we just a matter of weeks had the $8,000 pledged. So I called Phil Pennington, said, we got the money raised. And he said, okay, fine, I'm going to order it. And then May 3rd, 2003, a date which will live in infamy in Omaha, they installed the MoPix, and the first movie was played in Omaha.
And that was X-Men 2, huh?
And that was that was you're right. X-Men.
The timeline would follow because I believe the first X-Men came out in 2000, and so the second one would have been about 2003. So that would gel. So, what was the name of the theater that first ran the first described movie? Do you recall?
You mean in Omaha?
Yeah, in Omaha.
Yeah, Oakview AMC.
Oakview AMC. And that's where you and I went. That was the first movie we saw together in 2005. Was the third Star Wars movie. Revenge of the Sith, I believe, was at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that the only theater in Omaha for a while that ran description before others picked it up?
Yeah, and then almost like a year later in Lincoln, the Douglas Theater chain was building the Grand Cinema.
I remember it well.
In downtown Lincoln. And so my thought is, hey, we ought to contact Douglas Theater and get them to see if we could do the same thing and do it in Lincoln. And so I basically made the contact and kind of got the ball rolling. And then Lincoln raised the money, and the General Cinema in Lincoln was the Douglas Theater was the second theater in Nebraska to have it. So, back in the day, this was like 2004. Omaha had one and Lincoln had one, and that was as good about as any place in the country at the time.
Absolutely. It was a great theater. I remember they actually invited some of us for a closed screening test run, and the movie that we saw was Elektra. Again, another very forgettable. You remember that with Jennifer Garner?
Yeah, it was painful.
Yeah, very painful. And some of us told them that, but we got a nice write-up in the Journal Star and everything, and it was great. It was a very welcome addition for those of us in Lincoln as well, having a place to go for described movies.
So this thing that we accomplished here by raising the money locally, shortly that summer after we got it, WGBH did an interview with me, and I basically laid out the whole game plan that I used to get it, and made my contact information available. And then different places around the country reached out to me and got my packet of letters and game plan. And then around the country, other communities. I remember Austin, Texas, I think was the first one to use the game plan to get description. And then it just kind of kept going and going. And then about a year later, WGBH had a consumer advocacy group that they invited me to join. And so that was kind of cool because I got really back, inside information. I was on the cutting edge of, the whole description process. And I'll never forget when, this just started expanding like crazy. And we were talking to Larry Goldberg, who at the time was one of the top chieftains of WGBH, said, what's making this go? And he said, he goes, I'll tell you what, why this studios, so we're so blown away that there's such a demand for this that local communities were actually willing to raise money for theaters to put this in, that we got Hollywood's attention by doing this. And so that's one of the things that led to, description being more and more prevalent. And then the second thing that happened, the private raising of money, got things really going. But what really launched it into the stratosphere was class action lawsuits started springing up.
Really?
Under the ADA. I think New Jersey and Illinois and several states. And so the theaters chain started losing. So they were forced to put description in all their theaters. So now we had, the Hollywood was interested, but now we had an explosion of theaters putting this in. So we had more outlets for Hollywood, if they made described movies.
Right.
Then now there were just lots and lots and lots of theaters that had this. So it kind of went simultaneously, but it just really launched. And then the next thing that came was Do Re Mi, which is the main, I mentioned Boston Art and Lights or Magic and Lights or something like that. They were the original equipment makers for MoPix. This Do Re Mi, which is a Australian company, they created the technology which now we see in the theaters that was a much simpler, whereas when we first got description in Omaha, it was in one theater, one screen in one theater. And because they had to, if you were going to have it in more, you had to basically have a separate setup in each specific screen. This Do Re Mi was a much more cost-effective system, and that's where that's where we're at now, with all the theaters virtually, in all their screens having description available.
Mm. So Do Re Mi, I've not heard of them. Is this, and pardon my technical ignorance, but is this has anything to do with Fidelio?
Yeah, Fidelio is who makes Do Re Mi is who makes Fidelio.
Okay. This is where my buddy Wes would come in handy because he knows all of this like the back of his hand. But so they make Fidelio, and this is what we use now, where we go into a movie theater and we sit down with the headphones. They give us the headphones and the little control box at the front desk, and we go sit down, and it's running on the description's running on those headphones. That is Fidelio.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we continue with the narrative, I want to toss you a couple of more really difficult popcorn ball questions. In your view, favorite or best crime movie?
Boy, you're putting me on the spot. I would have to. The sad thing is there are fewer and fewer of those kinds of movies out anymore.
It's a heartbreaker.
Everything has gone to, special effects. The
comic book movies, the sequels and reboots and such, Star Wars
and I guess a specific crime movie is not coming to mind. I mean, I'm thinking of a few. I actually liked. It was kind of a sci-fi. Will Smith was in it. It might have been called. It was set in the future where a robot. There were robots that were prevalent in society in the future, and one of the robots had seemingly killed somebody, and that was against their programming. And so Will Smith was like a policeman at the time in the future, and so he was investigating this robot malfunction, which supposedly was not possible. And that was good, and it was described also.
So it was a crime movie, but it was kind of a sci-fi dystopian kind of crime movie.
Yeah. So. And it's the one that came to mind. I'm sure there's as I ponder. Like I said, I've thought about the 5 best movies of all time.
Right, you were ready for that one.
I've given that one thought, but the crime one doesn't.
Well, the one I would say, and it's probably an obvious choice, but I think it's The Godfather is pretty hard to beat in terms of epic crime movies.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't think of that so much as a crime, but I guess there's certainly they're as criminal as can be.
So
and that's certainly an amazing movie. And it's hard not, like I said, I gave you the definitive top 5, but there's probably 50 movies that are like honorable mention to that top 5.
Of course.
The Godfather would have to be in that.
The Godfather. And a lot of people will put Goodfellas at number 2, and I like Goodfellas. It's a solid movie, but one of my favorite movies, too, is The Departed. I don't know if you remember that. Well,
and that's probably as good as any. I really enjoyed that with Matt Damon and
Jack Nicholson.
Yep.
Great, great movie. All right. Best James Bond, in your opinion?
Well, I'm still, the original Sean Connery is what I grew up in. Back at talking about being a movie buff, the James Bond addiction was one of my early childhood movie, I guess, interests. I actually, a friend of mine, we actually went to drive-in movie theater where his mom dropped us off, and we actually got a chair, and they had like 3 James Bond movies that we sat outside and watched because we were like 12 years old, so we weren't driving. But Goldfinger or Thunderball would probably be 1 and 2, and on a given day I might change my mind which one I would rate different. Right. But I've really enjoyed the new. Daniel Craig, James Bonds. Those to me are very good. A lot of them kind of blurred together between Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan, and a lot of those just kind of blurred together. But,
sure. Yeah, they were kind of sleepers for me. Of course, I really didn't get into James Bond, ironically, until we started getting them with description because there's so much action involved in those movies. It's tough to track. So let's go back to Omaha here and talking about the local scene for described movies. So the people listening to our shows today, I don't know how often they go to movies or not, but let's say that somebody wanted to go to one of our theaters and they were interested in finding out whether or not a movie was described. in one of those theaters, what would be the process they would need to go through to determine whether or not a movie was described and then go to the theater and get access to that movie? Kind of walk us through that, the chronology of that.
Well, the first thing that if I want to know if a movie is described, and right now probably 90% plus of the movies are described, so you could pretty much could assume that it is, but there's a few exceptions out there. I can't even remember the last movie that I wanted to see that wasn't described. Some of the indie movies, some of the less, those you might run into more of a possibility that they're not described.
Smaller budget type stuff. Right.
But I always go to the Marcus website. To me, that's the fastest place I can see because it has the audio described, notation that when I go and look at movies. So to me, that's the fastest place that I find if it's described. Mm-hmm. Then, and typically most of the movies I go to are at the Marcus, so that's actually, I'm at the place and I can see what time it's playing. But one of the disappointing things is that the local theaters don't do a better job of promoting the fact that this exists. I don't think any of them have signs up. So a sighted person could be at the movie, and if there was a sign up, they would see, oh, this is something I had to tell my friend or relative about. So you pretty much have to know about this. But when you go to the front desk, you say, I want the visually impaired description. Sometimes you have to word it just right. But the key is all of the theaters, now not like Film Stream, which is, shows kind of not necessarily the big budget movies, but the Exarban, Marcus, AMC, Regal, Alamo Drafthouse.
Alamo Drafthouse. I love that place.
All of them have it. So if you get someone at the counter that doesn't know what you're talking about, they do have it. You just have to say, well, you need to get a manager because you do have it. So when you buy your ticket, you need the headset for the description. And the thing I like at the Marcus is that it's basically idiot-proof. All they have to do is pull out the headset and hand it to you, and then you turn it on, or if they turn it on. But there's a button on the right ear that you push, which turns the sound on, and it's when you go in the theater, it'll pick up the broadcast inside the theater, and there's no more to it than that. So all the ticket person had to do was hand you the headset. The right ear has a dial which controls the description. So you got to make sure that if the movie starts and you're not getting a description, make sure you turn that right dial up, because if it's set too low, it may not be, the description's there, it's just not broadcasting it. So give the dial a little twist, and then you're it's going to be there. The left ear is the soundtrack. That's designed for people that are visually or that are hard of hearing. So if they want to crank the volume up some more, they can. That's the left ear. So right ear is description, left ear is the soundtrack. What I usually do is tilt the headset up on my head, so my right ear is covered. I get the description, and my left ear I just listen to the broadcast on the screen. The AMC and the Exarban, that their headset's a little different. There you might want to bring your own earbuds. They have a headset that plugs into a box, and if you bring your own earbuds, you can plug it into that box, and there they're going to play the description out of both ears, and by using your own earbud, to me, I don't have any problem hearing the movie on the screen. Now, I know the Alamo and the Regal have it, and I've been to a Regal theater outside of Omaha, and I know it's the same as the Exarban and AMC, so I'm assuming it's the same here, that it's a headset, it's a box with a headset plugged into it, and so you could bring your own earbuds to the Regal, and then the description's coming out of both ears. Alamo, I'm not sure. I've not been to the Alamo, but I know they have it, but I'm not sure what their system is.
I haven't been to the one here, but I did go to the one in Denver a lot, and it was just there wasn't even a control box. It was just a set of earphones.
Okay.
So it's like the one you're talking about there. Now, let me ask you this. A lot of us, we touched on this earlier. There's kind of a glut now in Hollywood of comic book movies, animated, family Disney-type movies, reboots, Star Wars. There's not a lot of originality. A lot of us think that the best storytelling takes place on television. And even back when MoPix was flourishing, it was hard to get stuff described on television. How has that progressed in, say, the last 5 to 8 years?
And this is another thing that's interesting because, again, it's not publicized enough. If you are blind or visually impaired and live in Omaha, Cox Cable has Contour 2 that it's an upgraded system. If you were sighted and you got Contour 2, it's more expensive. But if you're blind or visually impaired, you can get Contour 2 at no additional cost to just the basic cable, and you can turn on the accessibility. And there's a remote control that has voice activated, and you can like push in the button and say go to 55, which is Turner Movie Classics, or you could say go to Turner Movie Classics. And it'll go there, so you don't have to, punch in any buttons. Then, if you've got accessibility turned on, that all the controls are voice, have an audio component. So if you go up a channel, it'll tell you what's on the channel and tell you, what it is. And so if you are blind and visually impaired and don't have Contour 2, you need to call Cox right now. Matter of fact, I even know the number, 402-933-3000. I don't know why that number has stayed with me forever, but it has.
I wonder why, Bob.
You need to call that number, and you need to tell them that you are blind, visually impaired, and that you want Contour 2. And if you have Contour 2 and haven't used the accessibility, then you can ask them about it. And it's basically you have to go in the menu originally and turn on the accessibility, but then on the accessibility you can turn on the second audio programming. So when you flip the channel if it's described, it will be just automatically described.
It's part of the reason you don't hear the Radio Talking Book audio signal on SAP Prime anymore. Is because there's so many more options now.
Now, funny thing, though, the SAP is used for the description, but it's also used for Spanish.
For foreign languages, yeah. We're on the French channel in case anybody ever wants to use their television instead of one of our special radios to use that. So
the funny thing is, which has happened more than once to me, if I record something on my DVR and I don't turn off SAP, if it's not described, I'm going to have the Spanish broadcast. So I've recorded some shows before in Spanish, and unfortunately my Spanish isn't near good enough to have any idea what's happening. So I've basically wasted the recording because it's recorded in Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a thing you got to remember. You got to turn the SAP off if you're recording something that's and many things are. It's amazing to me how many second audio programming shows there are with Spanish.
With Spanish now, as opposed to audio description.
So. Yeah, there's far more Spanish than there is description, but there is a fair amount of description. In 2010, on the 20th anniversary of the passage of ADA, Congress passed, if you recall back what was going on politically at the time, Congress was not passing many bills, or not passing them very easily, but just like in a week, both the House and Senate passed the ADA anniversary bill or whatever it was. But one of the things in there was what it required cable companies to make their cable accessible. That's, like I said, that's why Contour 2 is accessible, because it was mandated by law. So they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they're mandated by law to make this available. So if when you call them, this is not something they're doing, out of community spirit. They're doing it because it's required by law. So, and it's something they have to provide at no additional cost. So but that's what increased the number of shows that are described. So now I don't know, NFB Newsline is a service that if you're blind and visually impaired that you're eligible for, and there is a TV listing feature on NFB Newsline, and you can find out. You can go through your shows, and it'll tell you if it's described.
Yep. I was instrumental in helping set that up too, and it was nice to have access to that as well. Believe it or not, we're coming close to the end of our time. We got a few minutes left, and I got a couple more popcorn balls I want to toss you. Scariest movie ever, in your opinion?
Oh, that's an easy one to me. The original Halloween, and I saw that visually, and I had the creeps for a week. I mean, I was like, that night was not a restful night's sleep after I saw the original Halloween. That Psycho, the music was, when Anthony Perkins, kind of came lunging out as dressed up as his mom.
Yep.
But the original Halloween was as scary as it comes as far as I'm concerned.
To me, as a kid, Nightmare on Elm Street, particularly the original, was scariest because of course, I've been blind since birth. A lot of those other guys, like Jason from Friday the 13th, they didn't have any personality. But Freddy Krueger had not only a creepy voice, but he had a personality. So I thought that was pretty scary. All right, here's another one for you. Jack Nicholson versus Heath Ledger. Which one is the better Joker?
Heath Ledger.
Heath Ledger. I thought you would say that. I got to go with Heath Ledger, too, even though I grew up with Jack Nicholson. I actually grew up with Cesar Romero.
Oh, yeah, the original Batman. When I first got our first color TV back in the mid-'60s, that Batman show was like one of the coolest.
I love that. I still love that show. Frank Gorshin as the Riddler. You cannot beat him. He's so manic. Best comedy movie, in your opinion?
Well, Animal House was on my top 5.
Oh, that's right. It was. I forgot that.
So you can't go wrong with Animal House.
Right. And I got, probably the movie that makes me crack up a lot is Liar, Liar with Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey is really kind of a one-trick pony, but it's a funny movie. But in terms of intelligent humor, Airplane sure is funny.
Yeah, and Airplane Described is I saw it visually originally because there's so many sight gags going on. And,
right.
And so Airplane Described is if you're not getting to Describe, you're missing a lot of the funny stuff, but Describe, you're getting it all.
Right, indeed. Well, we are almost out of time, but tell us about your law practice a little bit and give the contact info for our listeners. I know you mentioned elder law, and a good deal of our listeners here at the Radio Talking Book Network are older, are they're senior citizens, so if they should want to contact you about some of that stuff you mentioned.
Wills and powers of attorney and setting up a trust to avoid probate. My office is on 113th and Q, and my telephone number is 402-331-9497. And you can go to my website, which is robertburns, BURNS, law.net. And,
that's robertburnslaw.net.
Yeah, give me a call, and, I'll be glad to help you. But a lot of people don't realize, especially not having powers of attorney, how vulnerable you are. You could avoid the need for your family having to go to court and be appointed your guardian conservator if you had just taken the steps of setting up a power of attorney, both financial and medical, before you needed them.
Mm-hmm.
Can't recommend that highly enough. And so those are my specialties. I basically have a non-litigation practice for the most part. So if you want to sue somebody, if you call me, I can give you a referral, but that's not my main emphasis. But basically any other form of law I know something about, or I can refer you to another lawyer. So you can call me. I've been practicing law since 1984. So as we say, I've been practicing long enough. I'm starting to get the hang of it. Or the other funny joke is I passed the bar in 1984, and I haven't passed a bar since without going in. But but anyway, so I've been doing it a long time, and be glad to help. Because I know what it is like to be blind and visually impaired. It's if you want to have a reliable starting place, give me a call, and I can either help you or refer you to somebody that can.
All right. We may have to have you back because the stories you could probably tell as not only a lawyer but a blind lawyer, a lot of people would probably find fascinating. So do you have a pretty good clientele?
Yeah, it is. And it's, the other thing that's nice is, most of the people that I do business with don't know I'm blind until, they've our first appointment. And so I've been able to, practice law and be blind and, basically be hopefully a positive ambassador to the public for blindness, letting them know that, we can do things, well and competently. And even though we're not sighted, that's not a killer.
Right. Well, Bob, it has been a pleasure talking with you today and learning about the history of described media, not only nationally, but here in Omaha. Thank you for all the work you've done on our behalf, and for every weekend I get to spend enjoying some overpriced popcorn and a pop at the movies, getting description. I know I'll give you credit where credit is due. Thank you very much for that.
Glad to do it. And it's, the funny thing is, back when I found out from AMC that it was going to cost $8,000 to do it, if push come to shove, I would have put up the money. I was much happier to raise the money in the community, but I'm such a movie buff that it would have been worth it to me.
Absolutely.
And then that you talk about expensive popcorn, that really would have even amortized over the movies I would have seen. That would have made my movie experiences much more expensive. But it's a great service, and it's revolutionized enjoyment, entertainment, for me as a blind movie buff.
Absolutely. My friends, that does it for us at Community Conversations. My name is Ryan O., your station manager. Thank you for joining us today, and please stay tuned for more great programming coming up on Radio Talking Book. Back to Becca in the control room.